So, before I start, have you ever wondered why there is Moro and non-Moro people in Mindanao? So, before Spanish colonialization in 1500s, Islam has already spread out throughout the southern Philippines, particularly in Mindanao and Sulu archipelago, through Arab merchants and missionaries. So, according to my research, Islam is the second largest religion here in the Philippines. Historically, Islam reached the Philippines in 14th century through Muslim Malay and Arab merchants. Then, the first missionaries followed in the late 14th century and 15th century. They are the one who facilitate the formation of sultanates. So sultanates, it is a state or territory ruled by a sultan. So indigenous people who converted to Islam forming a sultanates. So they also developed their distinct cultural identities. So these groups became Muslims or also known as Moro. Moro means Moors or Muslims of North Africa who ruled Spain for centuries. So there are some indigenous people who did not convert into Islam. So they are the groups who retain their own tradition, culture, and beliefs, and now referred to as non-Moro. So Luman is a native or indigenous people that are part of the broader non-Moro population. So the first lowland indigenous people in Mindanao we will tackle is the Agusan Manobo. Agusan Manobo before the arrival of foreign colonizer, the Agusan Manobo people live in forested and riverine areas of what is now Agusan del Sur and Agusan del Norte in Mindanao. They were one of many indigenous Manobo subgroups scattered throughout the island. They are among the oldest Lumad groups in Mindanao. They are believed to be the descendants of the earliest Austronesian settlers who migrated to the Mindanao thousands of years ago, later spreading along river system. Manubo is derived from the Malay word manubo, meaning person or people. So the term Agusan refers to their whole homeland along the Agusan River basin. The Manubo society was closely tied to the nature, with their daily life revolving around the rivers, forests, and mountains that provided food, shelter, and spiritual meaning. They practiced sustained agriculture using kaingin or slash and burn method to clear land for planting rice, curd, and root crops. They also gathered wild fruits, vegetables, hunted wild animals, and fish in the rivers. So socially, Abusan Manubo live in a small kinship-based communities led by a dato or chief who was both a political and spiritual leader. So the dato maintained peace, settled disputes, and presided over rituals. Their society was patriarchal, where men held authority in leadership and decision-making. Polygamy was practiced, but only men capable of supporting multiple wives can do so. So culturally, they adorn themselves with colorful clothing, beads, tattoos, and ornaments made from natural materials like shells, woods, and metals. Tattooing and ear piercing were important marks of beauty, bravery, and social identity. Spirits beliefs were essential to Agusan Manubo tribe. They believed that the world was inhabited by unseen spirits that live in trees, rivers, mountains, and even household objects. These spirits could bless or curse human depending on how they were treated. Rituals, offerings, and prayers were performed to ensure harmony between people and the spirit world. So the Manobo also believed in a supreme being known as the Magbabaya or Great Creator, though they focused their daily rituals on lesser spirits who directly influenced their life. So Agusan Manubon shamanic rituals involves music, dance, and offerings to appease spirits for blessings, healings, and protection. Shamans or bailats use solo songs called tugong or rituals object like betel nut to communicate with spirits. These rituals, which can include animal sacrifices, aim to restore balance by transforming spirit hostility into harmony and re-establishing good relation with the spiritual and natural worlds. So before colonialization, the Agusan Manubo had no written language, but they possessed a rich oral tradition, myths, epics, songs, and chants that pass down their history, laws, and moral lesson. These oral stories help preserve their identity and connection to their ancestor. During Spanish colonialization, the Agusan Manubo were mostly unreached because they lived in remote areas. Some were converted to Christianity by missionaries, but many resisted and kept their traditional beliefs and customs. Their dato system slowly weakened as Spanish influence grew. After colonialization, especially under American rule and later the Philippine government, the Agusan Manubo lost mass of their ancestral lands due to migration, logging, and mining. But despite these challenges, they continue to preserve their cultural language, traditions, remaining one of Mindanao's most resilient nomad groups. Now, let's dive into the Moro ethnolinguistic group in Mindanao. One of these is the Badjao or Sama Dilao. The Badjao, also known as the Sea Glypses, are an indigenous group in the coastal areas in Mindanao, primarily in Tawi-Tawi, Sulu, and Basilan, and parts of Zamboanga. Traditionally a nomadic seafaring tribe, they have historically lived on houseboats called bintas or in-stealth houses on the water, making a living through fishing and free diving. They are known for their unique skills in underwater spearfishing and their deep connection to the sea. The Badjao originated from the wider Sama ethnic group, who gradually adopted a fully sea-based lifestyle across the Sulu archipelago. They likely came from the coastal areas of Borneo and the Sulu Sea, migrating across maritime Southeast Asia. The word Badjao means sea people in their language. They are also known as Sama Dilaot, meaning Sama of the Sea. They are nomadic seafarers living in boats, lipa-lipa, fishing, diving for pearls, and collecting sea cucumbers. Some later settled in coastal state villages. Originally animist, they believe in sea spirits and ancestral guardians. Many later converted to Islam through traditional sea rituals remain. They are famous for their free diving skills, boat craftsmanship, and colorful traditional dances or igal. Badjao boat craftsmanship is renowned for producing durable, functional houseboats known as lipa, and smaller outrigger boats like the binta. This craft is characterized by skilled woodworking, distinctive decorative carvings on the prow like dragon and starry manok design, and a practical adaptable construction that reflects their nomadic seafaring lifestyle. Badjao traditional clothing includes a tube-like wrap-around skirt called a patajong, worn by both men and women. Women may also wear a sablay or simpay with a patajong, which can serve multiple functions like sash, blanket, or head covering. So their clothing often features geometric and nature-inspired design, reflecting their connection to the sea. So before Islam reached them, the Badjao practiced animism, belief in nature and sea spirits or umbok or tulong. They offered rituals and prayers to the sea gods for safe journeys and good catch. Even after Islam spread, many Badjao continued this ancient sea-based tradition mixed with Islamic practices. The Spanish tried to colonize the Sulu archipelago and convert its people to Christianity, but they failed to control the Badjao. The Badjao avoided Spanish influence by living at sea, or in remote coastal areas. They preferred this to stay neutral and far from conflicts. So they were often caught between the Spanish and powerful Sulu sultanates, ruled by Muslims and Tausug leaders. During American rule, the Badjao remained marginalized and isolated, with little access to education and land ownership. The introduction of modern laws and territories disrupted their nomadic sea life. Some were forced to settle on the land. Modern period. So many Badjao have now settled along coastal communities in Zamboanga, Sulu, Basilan, Davao, and even Luzon cities like Manila and Cebu. They continue to practice fishing, diving, and boat making, but many now live in poverty due to a loss of sea territory and discrimination. So, interesting facts about Badjao is some Badjao can dive over 20 meters deep without equipment. They perform ritual dances mimicking the movement of waves and fish. Banguingoy is also a Moro ethnolinguistic group in Mindanao. So the Banguingoy developed from the Sama people who settled in the Banguingoy island of Sulu, forming their own distinct identity. So the Banguingoy live in coastal villages and houseboats or lipa-lipa. They are part of the Sama ethnolinguistic family with ancestral roots in the Malay maritime world. Bangoy is a distinct ethnolinguistic group native to Balangoy Island but also dispersed throughout the Sulu archipelago and southern and western coastal regions in the Zamboanga Peninsula in Mindanao. Bangoy, formerly known as Sangil, is a coastal municipality in the island province of Sulu. From its original name Tongkil, it was renamed Banguingoy in January 29, 1999 by virtue of Muslim Mindanao Autonomy Act No. 71 of the Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao in honor of the dominant Banguingoy tribe of the municipality. So, it also known as Sama Banguingoy or Sama Bangingi, and Samal Banguingoy is a distinct ethnolinguistic group dispersed throughout the Greater Sulu archipelago and southern and western coastal areas of the Zamboanga Peninsula in Mindanao. So they were expert sailors, traders, and boat builders who navigated the sea for commerce and defense. They followed Islam but also keep their older beliefs in sea spirits and omens. They are known for their boat building skills, binta, garay, and maritime warfare during the pre-colonial period. Their warboats could carry up to 200 men. They built beautifully painted bintas, now iconic symbols of Mindanao. They practiced Islam long before Spanish arrival, introduced to Arab and Malay traders around the 13th to 14th century. They were part of the Sulu Sultanate spheres of influence, often serving as sailors or warriors. Society was organized around datus or local leaders. They practiced Islam long before Spanish arrived. So, the Spanish encountered the Banguingoy during their campaigns to control Mindanao and Sulu. The Banguingoy were labeled as pirates by the Spanish because of their sea raids, which were actually part of their defense and economic survival. So the Banguingoy were feared seafarers known as maritime raids or pangayaw across the Visayas and Luzon. They raided Spanish-controlled areas for slaves and goods, partly in retaliation of colonial institution. So the Spanish launched several Balangingis expeditions to destroy their forts and villages. So in 1848, Spanish forces under Governor Narciso Claveria attacked and destroyed Balangingi Island, capturing many Banguingoy and resettling them into other areas like Isabela, Basilan. Many Banguingoy were enslaved or displaced, but others fled deeper into the Sulu archipelago. Under the American rule, ended Spanish control, and introduced a new system of governance. The Banguingoy, like other Moro groups, faced new challenges under the U.S. rule, including land loss and integration pressure. Now, today, the Banguingoy are recognized as one of the 13 Moro ethnolinguistic groups in Mindanao and Sulu. They continue to live mainly in Sulu, Basilan, and Zamboanga, practicing Islam and preserving their seafaring tradition. Many are still engaged in fishing, boat making, and small-scale trade. The Banguyan language and dialect of Sama and culture continue to thrive, though modernization and conflict in Mindanao have affected their traditional way of life. They proud of their maritime heritage and resistance against colonialization. Another Moro ethno-linguistic group in Mindanao is Iranon. The Ilanon called Iranon and Ilianon as well are closely related culturally and linguistically to the Maranao and Maguindanao. The Iranon are the Austronesian maritime people originally from the coastal areas of Maguindanao, Lanao del Sur, and parts of Sulu and Zamboanga Peninsula. The Ilanon language is part of the Austronesian family that is most closely related to Maranao. When the Spaniards left, however, contact between the Maranao and Ilanon decreased. The majority of Ilanon live along the coastline of the towns of Nulini, Parang, Matano, and Barira in Maguindanao province. Along the Iliana Bay coast, north of the mouth of the Pulangi River, and all the way to Sibugay Bay in the Zamboanga del Sur, and even the western coastal plain of Borneo. Ilanon, a Malay term meaning pirate, is appropriate for the people of this ethnic group, who were once regarded as the fiercest pirates in the Malay. The Iranon form as a distinct maritime community along the coastal areas of Lanao del Sur and Maguindanao, playing a key role in the early Maguindanao sultanates. Their unity as a group was built through shared seafaring, trade, and defense alliances. They are descendants of Austronesian settlers who inhabited Mindanao's coast. Over time, they developed close ties with neighboring Maguindanao and Maranao groups. Iranon, sometimes spelled Ilanon or Iranon, means people of the lake or inlanders, in reference to the early settlements near Lake Lanao before moving toward the sea. Traditionally, the Ilanons were skilled sailors, fishermen, and warriors. They built strong communities based on kinship and maintained fleets for both trades and defense. They also farmed rice, corn, and inland areas. They were already Muslims before the arrival of Spanish, having been influenced by Arab and Malay traders who spread Islam in Mindanao as early as the 14th century. They were among the first in Mindanao to embrace Islam, shaping their laws and moral codes under Sharia. Religious leaders or imams guided community life. The Iranon were skilled sailors, navigators, and boat builders. They built large warships called lano or angaray, which they used for trade, exploration, and later for warfare. They were known as seafaring warriors who established tradings and raiding routes across the Sulu Sea, Celebes Sea, and even as far as Malaysia and Indonesia. So their society was organized under datus, or local ships. And they had strong alliances with neighboring Moro groups like the Tauso and Sama Badjao. So during Spanish colonial period, the Iranon firstly resisted Spanish colonialization. So they became one of the most feared maritime forces in Southeast Asia. Because of their naval strength, the Spanish called them pirates, but in truth, they were defenders of their homeland and their Islamic faith. The Iranon often joined forces with the Tausug of Sulu and Maguindanaoan warriors to conduct maritime raids against Spanish settlements and Christianized coastal towns in the Visayas and northern Mindanao. These raids were not just for plunder but also a form of resistance and retaliation against Spanish attacks in Moro territories. The Spanish launched numerous Moro wars against the Iranon and other Muslim groups, but they never fully subdued them. Many Iranon settled along the coast of Cotabato, Lanao, and parts of Sabah, Malaysia, establishing small communities and continuing their seafaring traditions. So, when the Spanish took control in the Philippines, the Iranon were again drawn into conflict. resisting American campaigns to subdue Moro's territories. So over time, many Iranon integrated with neighboring Maguindanao and Maranao communities. Though they retain their distinct language and tradition, they continue to live mainly in the Maguindanao, del Norte and del Sur, Lanao del Sur, and parts of Zamboanga Peninsula. So today, the Iranon are recognized as one of the 13 Moro ethnolinguistic groups in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao or BARM. They remain known for their rich maritime heritage, Islamic faith, and historical bravery in defending their independence against foreign colonizer. Hama Mapon is one of the Moro ethnolinguistic group in Mindanao. So, Hama Mapon is the native inhabitants of the Cagayan de Tawi-Tawi or Cagayan de Sulu or Mapon and the Turtle Island where it is closest to the Sabah, Malaysia. They are also found in northern Palawan and other nearby islands. Hama Mapon is from the word Hama meaning people and Mapon which indicates the name of the island, municipality of Mapon, thus called the people of Mapon. They are one of the Bangsa-Moro ethnic tribes in the Philippines. They are the Sama-speaking people widely known for their creativity and traditions. Their spoken language is called Pulon Mapon meaning Mapon language. They speak a Sama Badjao language of the Austronesian language family, and most are adherents of Islam. They are believed to have come from Malay and Sama ancestors who settled on the island centuries ago due to migration and maritime trade. So they live mainly as farmers and fishers, cultivating coconuts, cassava, bananas, and sea trading with the Tausug, Malays, and Indonesians. So they live in coastals and island communities, often use boats or bintas for travels and trade. So their social lives centered on family and community cooperation. They are also known for their mat waving and trading with nearby islands. So organized around kinship ties and community elders or panglima maintain close relation with the Tausug Sultanates of Sulu. So they are devout Muslims following Islamic teaching in daily life. However, some older beliefs in ancestral spirits and omens persist. They are known for their peaceful nature, beautiful hand-woven mats, and oral poetry that tells of their ancestors and faith. So before Islam, they practiced animism, belief in nature spirits and ancestral spirits. Later, they adopted Islam through the contact of Arab traders and missionaries, likely before Spanish arrival. So limited Spanish control, the Hama Mapon and other island groups in Sulu were never fully colonized by Spanish due to the strong resistance and the distance from Spanish-controlled areas. The Spanish attempted to control the Sulu archipelago but faced resistance from the Sulu Sultanates, which the Hama Mapon supported. So they were occasionally involved in naval skirmishes or raids labeled Moro Wars by Spain. So Islam became even more established under the influence of Sulu and Malay teachers. So the Hama Mapon continued to preserve their traditional customs and autonomy during this period. So the Americans introduced education, governance system, and infrastructure, but their influence in Mapon was still limited. So the Sulu Sultanate's power declined and the Hama Mapon became part of the Philippine national territory. So Christianity spread in some Mindanao areas, but the Hama Mapon remained Muslims and maintained their tradition. So today, the Hama Mapon recognized as one of the 13 Moro ethnolinguistic groups in the Philippines. Their community remained predominantly Muslims and continues to practice Islamic tradition mixed with local customs. Another Moro ethnolinguistic group in Mindanao is the Calagan. So Calagan are the Islamic indigenous people in the western Davao Gulf area. They became Muslims most likely during the middle of the 19th century due to the political pressures and/or influence of the Tausug migrants of Davao. Extensive exposure and/or contact with the communities of their Maguindanao neighbors, and intermarriage of Calagan and the Maguindanao and/or Tausug. They predominantly found in Davao City, distinct of Sirawan around Tagum, Davao del Norte, Mati in Davao Oriental, and some places in Davao del Sur and two other Davao provinces. The Calagan use the Taga-Kaulo language but have increasingly incorporated some Tausug and Maguindanaoan words. They trace their origin to the indigenous Austronesian settlers living along the Compostela Valley. Calagan or Kaaggan comes from the word Kaag meaning friend or ally, referring to the cooperative social nature. They renowned as agriculturalists cultivating rice, corn, abaca, and coconut for cash crops, whereas their counterparts living along the coast practiced fishing. Villages were led by a dato and imams, and kinship ties determined leaderships and land use. So they blended Islamic teaching with traditional animist beliefs such as reverence for nature and spirits and ancestors. So they are known for their brass ornaments, ritual dances, and colorful woven clothing that reflects both Lumad and Moro influences. So originally they are animists, believing in spirit of natures, trees, rivers, and mountains. Eventually converted to Islam before the arrival of the Spanish through contact with Magindanaoan and Tausug Muslims missionaries. So their Islam blended with traditional beliefs, making it unique and localized. The Calagan live far from the main Spanish center like Manila and Cebu, so they were not directly colonized. However, Spanish missionaries attempted to convert them to Christianity through missions in Davao and Tagum areas. So the Calagan resisted and retreated inland to avoid Spanish control, maintained alliances with Muslim sultanates, especially the Maguindanao, shared in trade and defense network against Spanish incursions. Thus, they are recognized as one of the 13 Moro ethnolinguistic group in the Philippines. So today, they continue practicing Islamic tradition like circumcisions, fasting, and prayer, maintain their customary laws or adat alongside Islamic law or Sharia, preserve traditional dances, chants, and rituals tied to agriculture and harvest. So when the American established public schools and local governments, but the Calagan remained somewhat isolated. So the government attempted to integrate Muslims and Lumad groups, but the Calagan betrayed their Islamic faith. So some began adopting modern education and trade. So today, the Calagan, mostly in Davao del Norte, Davao Oriental, and Davao de Oro, continue to practice Islam but with local custom and tradition intertwined. So many Calagan communities are part of Bangsamoro identity. So even though they are outside the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. So interesting facts about the Calagan is they are considered bridge between the Lumad and Moro cultures. So their dances often symbolize spiritual communication and community harmony. Let's proceed to the Kulibugan. So the Kulibugan are found mainly in Zamboanga Peninsula, particularly in Zamboanga del Norte, Zamboanga Sibugay, and Zamboanga del Sur. So they live in areas near the Subanon and the Tausug or the Maguindanaoan groups. So the term Kulibugan comes from the Tausug word Kulibug, meaning mixed or half-bred. It refers to the mixed ancestry, descendants of the Subanon and Muslim groups, mostly Tausug or Maguindanaoan. So the Kulibugan are considered part of the Moro ethnolinguistic groups, but they retain many Subanon tradition. So their culture reflects a blend in indigenous and Islamic influences, mainly farmers, fishermen, and traders. So they practice barter and local trade in neighboring coastal and inland communities. So they live in small kinship-based settlement led by the elders or datus. So before converting to Islam, their Subanon ancestors were animists, worshipping spirits and natures and ancestors. So with intermarriage and contact with Muslim groups, the Kulibugan gradually adopted Islam. However, their Islam remained blended with other traditional practices. So during the Spanish colonial period, the Kulibugan lived mostly in areas that were not directly controlled by the Spanish. So Spain's control was limited to Zamboanga City and nearby coastal ports. So the Kulibugan, like other Muslims and Lumatus, resisted the Spanish authority and Christianization. So some communities moved inland to avoid conflict and preserve their way of life. So Islam spread further during the time due to the alliances with Tausug and the Maguindanao traders and missionaries. So the Pulihugan continued their mixed culture, practicing Islamic customs like fasting and circumcision, while keeping traditional Spanon beliefs in spirits and healing rituals. So the Americans brought education, local government, and economic development, but the Pulibugan communities remained rural and self-sufficient. So some Pulibugan began to receive formal education and participate in local trade. So many still identify as Muslim Subanon, showing their mixed heritage. Today, the Pulibugan live mostly in Zamboanga Peninsula and nearby islands. So they are recognized also as part of the 13 Moro and linguistic group in Philippines. So mostly of the Pulibugan are Muslims, though they still maintain traditional Sabanan customs and ceremonies, healing, and marriage. So they engage in farming, fishing, and small-scale commerce. Despite modernization, they continue to value peaceful coexistence and cultural blending. So, interesting facts about Pulibugan are they are sometimes called Muslim Subayan because of their mixed heritage. Now, let's dive into the Maguindanao. So, the Maguindanao are an ethnolinguistic Moro group living mainly in the Maguindanao provinces, particularly in Maguindanao del Norte and Maguindanao del Sur in central Mindanao, along the Pulangi or Rio Grande River basin. So, their homeland is one of the most fertile and strategic areas in Mindanao. So, the word Maguindanao means people of the floodplain or people of the river from Magi to be flooded and the now lake or flooded area. So, around the early 16th century, Sharif Kabung Suwan, an Arab Malay missionary from Malaysia, arrived in Cotabato. He introduced Islam and established the Sultanate of Maguindanao, one of the most powerful Islamic states in the Philippines. So the famous Sharif Kabung Suwan is honored as the founder of Islam in central Mindanao. The Sultanate united various tribes under Islamic law and governance. The Maguindanao people were farmers, traders, and fishers. Their fertile land allowed them to grow rice, corn, and coconuts, and they traded with Tausug, Maranao, Malay, and also Chinese merchants. They had a complex social structure, led by a sultan and supported by datus and imams. So, practiced Islam as their main religion long before Spanish arrived. Built strong political and religious system based on Islamic principles and local customs, or adat, known for their kolintang music, waving, and oral literature, especially the Darangen epics, shared with the Maranao. So, during the Spanish colonial period, the Maguindanao were part of the Moro resistance against Spanish colonialization. So, the Spanish launched several Moro wars to conquer Mindanao but failed to subdue the Maguindanao sultanates. So, the Maguindanao fought firstly to protect their religion, land, and independence. So, the Maguindanao sultanates formed alliances with the Sulu sultanates and Maranao principalities to strengthen Muslims' unity against colonial forces. So, the Maguindanao continues their Islamic tradition, maintaining mosques, madrasas, Islamic schools, and Sharia law. So, Spanish influence was minimal except in some coastal areas where trade took place. So, when Americans defeated the remaining Moro resistance through the Moro Rebellion, the Sultanate system lost political power, replaced by American-style governance. Education, infrastructure, and trade expanded, but the Maguindanao remained strongly Islamic and culturally distinct. So the Maguindanao people continue to play an important role in Mindanao political and cultural identity. So they became essential to the Bangsa-Moro movement, which sought autonomy for Muslim people. So in 2019, the Bangsa-Moro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao was established, including the Maguindanao territory, fulfilling part of their historic self-rule aspiration. So many Magindanaons nowadays are farmers, traders, educators, and leaders. They maintain a strong Islamic faith, practicing daily prayers, Ramadan fasting, and other Islamic tradition, known for kulintang in symbols, colorful malos and attires, and rich oral traditions. The Maguindanao Sultanates was one of the most powerful political systems in pre-colonial Philippines. So they are closely related to the Maranao people culturally and linguistically. So the word Maranao itself is derived from the word Mindanao itself is derived from Maguindanao. Another Moro ethnolinguistic group in Mindanao is the Maranao. So the Maranao, also spelled Maranao, live around Lake Lanao in Lanao del Sur and Lanao del Norte. So the word Maranao literally means people of the lake. Ranao, it means lake. So the Maranao trace their roots to early Malay settlers who migrated to Mindanao centuries ago. So their society was organized into sultanates or small kingdoms, each ruled by a sultan and a council of nobles or datus. So they had a well-developed system of law and governance based on Islamic law and local custom. So the Maranao were Islamic before Spanish arrival around the 14th to 15th century to Arab and Malay missionaries. So particularly via the Sharif Kabungsuan lineage. So despite their Islamization, they preserve elements of indigenous beliefs in nature and ancestral spirits, often blended with Islamic practices. Skilled farmers, weavers, traders, and metal workers. So they are famous for ochre's design, carving geometric patterns to Rogan houses, royal homes, and brass gongs. So so music. So the Turugan is traditional royal houses with ornate or ochre carvings, symbolizing prestige. So they also practice rice and corn agriculture and traded with Tausug, Maguindanao, and coastal Chinese merchant. So the Maranao have a rich oral literature, including the Darangen epic, which was declared as a UNESCO masterpiece of oral and intangible heritage of humanity. So the Darangen epic is one of the oldest and longest epic in the Philippines. So during the Spanish colonial period, the Maranao, like other Moro groups, strongly resisted Spanish colonialization. So the Spanish tried several times to conquer the Lake Lanao, but the Maranao defended their homeland through guerrilla warfare and alliances with the Maguindanao Sultanates. So their resistance became part of the centuries-long Moro Wars because the Maranao heartland was inland and mountainous. So the Spanish had very limited control. The Maranao would retain their Islamic faith, culture, and independence throughout the Spanish rule. So only a few coastal areas of Lanao saw Spanish ports or mission, continue Islamic education through madrasa or religious schools. So they maintained their sultanate system, adat laws, and traditional arts. So the women played active roles in trade and crafts, showing a social balance within their community. So the American finally entered Lanao in the early 1900s. So after defeating the last Moro resistance, the Battle of Badjao marked the beginning of the American rule in Mindanao lands. So American introduced public education, infrastructure, and governance,
but the Maranao continued to preserve their Islamic and local identity. So some Maranao became educated leaders, bridging Islamic and national governance. The Maranao have been active in Bangsamoro movement, seeking greater autonomy for Muslim Filipinos. So many Maranao became businessmen, people, educators, and professionals, especially in Marawi City, once known as the Islamic city of the Philippines. So despite modernization, they remain deeply Islamic, observing Ramadan, daily prayers, and Islamic festivals. So the Marawi sage deeply affected their community, but rebuilding efforts continue with strong cultural pride.
Another Moro ethnolinguistic group in Mindanao is the Samal. The Samal, also spelled as Sama or Sama Samal, are part of the larger Sama ethnolinguistic group. They live mainly in the Sulu Archipelago, Basilan, Tawi-Tawi, Zamboanga Peninsula, and coastal areas of Davao and Palawan. Some groups migrated to Malaysia, Sabah due to trade and intermarriage. Samal is an old Spanish term used to describe the land-dwelling Sama people. Samal and Sama refers to the same ethnolinguistic family, but Samal often refers to those who are more land-based or coastal, while Sama de Laot or Badjao are sea-based. The Sama themselves or the Samal themselves often refer to their ethnic group as Sama, while outsiders or Spaniards call them Samal. Today, Sama and Samal are often used interchangeably. Mostly coastal dwellers who engage in fishing, pearl diving, seaweed farming, and small-scale trade. Many Samal communities also became skilled boat builders and navigators. Some inland Samal cultivated rice, cassava, and coconuts. They traded with Tausug, Maguindanao, and Malays, forming part of the Sulu Sultanate's maritime network. So before Islam, the Samal practiced animism, believing in the spirit of the sky, sea, and land. Around the 14th to 15th century, they converted to Islam through the contact with the Arab, Malay, and Tausug traders. So Islam became central to their identity, but traces of old folk beliefs remain. So during Spanish colonial period, the Samal were important allies of the Sulu Sultanates, serving as seafarers, traders, and warriors. So many Samals joined Moro-resistant movements against Spanish incursion. They helped people protect trade routes between Sulu, Mindanao, and Borneo. So the Spanish often viewed the Samal as part of the Moro pirates since they resisted colonialization and conducted maritime raids against Spanish-controlled areas. So in reality, these trades were part of defending their freedom and maritime economy. So the Samal keep their Islamic faith, language, or cinema, and sea-based tradition intact. So the Spanish had very limited control over the Sulu zone, so the Samal remained independent. When American established political control over Mindanao and the Sulu archipelago, some Samal communities began to settle permanently on land, building villages along the coast. So the Americans introduced education and local governance, but the Samals still maintained their Islamic identity and cultural independence. Today, the Samal are recognized as one of the 13th Moro ethnolinguistic group in the Philippines. Moreover, there is another Moro ethnolinguistic group in Mindanao. It is the Sangil. So the Sangil people came from the Sangihe Islands between Mindanao and Sulawesi and established settlements in southern Mindanao long before colonial times. So Sangil descended from Sangihe, an archipelago in eastern Indonesia, from where they hailed. So they migrated from Sangihe and Talaut Island, so centuries ago, to trade, exploration, and kinship ties. So Sangil, an Austronesian language, appears to have an affinity to Sama with regards to the pronunciation of words, manner of speaking, and vocabulary. So their speaking Sangir is closely related to Indonesian languages. Concentration of Sangil inhabit the island of Balut and Sarangani, as well as parts of the coastal region of South Cotabato and Davao del Sur provinces. So their name came from the original homeland, the Sangihe Islands. Hence Sangil or Sangir. The Sangil are closely related to the Maranao and Maguindanao Muslims but have their own distinct language and traditions. So primary subsistence of the Sangil revolve around fishing and lowland intensive agriculture and horticulture. So boat building is also a prime activity such as vinta and pump boats. Traditionally, local village groups were comprised of exogamous or matrilineages. Filipino bilateral relationship developed later. So they were fisher for folk, boat builders and traders, living along coast and island. They grew root crops and coconuts and traded with neighboring Moro groups. So they are known for maritime skills, sea navigation, and lively traditional dances and song. So before Islam spread widely, the Tamil people practiced animism, worshipping nature and spirits, ancestral spirits, and local deities. So they celebrate sea rituals to honor ancestral spirits for safe travel. So the Spanish have limited control over Sangil areas because these were far from colonial centers and were mostly in Muslim-influenced territories. So the Sangil resisted Spanish attempts to convert them to Christianity. So they joined the Moro groups in fighting Spanish forces to protect their homeland and their religion. So when the American introduced the new system of governance, education, and land ownership, which disrupted traditional ways, some Sangil lands were absorbed in government resettlement areas leading to land displacement. So Christianity spread more rapidly, but many Sangil remained Muslim. So during the Japanese period, the Sangil people suffered like other Mindanao groups. Their land were affected by war and some were forced to flee to safer areas. So the Sangil community today live mostly in Sarangani provinces, especially in Balut Island and Sarangani Island, Davao Occidental, and parts of General Santos City. So they continue to preserve their culture and language through some tradition have blended with Filipino and Indonesian influences. So many are Muslims but some have become Christians, especially through intermarriage. In addition, there are also the Tausug. The Tausug are native to the Sulu archipelago, mainly living in the Hulu Island and parts of Basilan, Tawi-Tawi, and Zamboanga Peninsula. So the Tausug established the Sultanates of the Sulu in the 15th century, becoming one of the earliest organized Islamic state in the Philippines. So the Sultanates united surrounding island under one political and religious rule. They are descendants of Malay and Arab settlers who mixed with indigenous islanders of Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, and Basilan. Tausug comes from Tao means people and Sug means currents. So the Tausug means people of the current, reflecting their maritime lifestyle. The Tausug were among the first groups in the Philippines to embrace Islam around the 13th century through Arab traders and missionaries. Islam became the center of their culture, governance, and law. Sulu Sultanates around 1450, the Sulu Sultanates was founded by Sharif ul Hazem, an Arab Malay missionary. The Sultanate became powerful Islamic kingdom, uniting the Tausug and other island groups like Sama and Yakan. It ruled over much of Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, Basilan, and parts of Mindanao and Sabah. The Tausug serves as warriors, traders, and political leaders of this empire. Skilled seafarers, traders, brave divers, and warriors. So they traded with Borneo, Malaya, and the rest of Mindanao, exchanging pearls, sea cucumbers, and goods. So their society was ruled by Sultan, Datus, and religious leaders, or ulama. So they have their social structure. Sultan, the highest leader. Datos, there are local chiefs. commoners, and artisans. So during the Spanish colonial period, the Tausug fiercely resisted the Spanish colonialization for more than 300 years. They led the Moro Wars defending their land, religion, and freedom. So the Spanish managed to build forts in Hulu but never conquered the Sulu. So Tausug warriors were known for their bravery, especially in juramentado attacks or religious resistance. So the Tausug continued practicing Islamic law, culture, and education under the sultanates. So the Spanish called all Muslims Filipinos Moros, a term the Tausug later embraced with pride. So the Americans dismantled the Sulu sultanates but allowed local rule under the Bates Treaty for a while. Later, they imposed direct governance, leading to Moro revolts and resistance. So the Tausug began to adapt to modern education and political structure through Islam remained strong. So today, the Tausug became part of the Bangsamoro identity, one of the 13 Moro ethnolinguistic groups. So many Tausug leaders played key roles in Moro resistance movements and in the creation of the Bangsamoro autonomous region in Muslims Mindanao. So they are found in Sulu, Basilan, Tawi-Tawi, Zamboanga, and parts of Palawan and Sabah. Lastly, the Yakan. The Yakan people are indigenous to Basilan Island, particularly around Isabela City and Lamitan. Some also live in Zamboanga City and other parts of western Mindanao due to migration and trade. So the name Yakan comes from the word Yakang, means to go inland or to the mountains. So they are also considered one of the 13 Moro ethnolinguistic groups, though they have also distinct cultural traits compared to the other Moro groups. Traditionally farmers and weavers, the Yakan grew rice, cassava, and coconuts. So they live in mountain villages, making them less involved and sea trade than groups like the Tausug and Sama. So the Yakan are known for their vibrant hand-woven textile using abaca and pineapple fibers dyed with natural colors. So before Islam, the Yakan practiced animism, believing in nature, spirits, and ancestor. Islam reached Basilan around the 14th to 15th century through Tausug and Arab missionaries from the Sulu Sultanates. So over time, they became devout Muslim, blending Islamic and traditional custom in their ritual. So during the Spanish colonial period, they tried to control Basilan but met strong resistance from the Yakan and the Tausug. So the Yakan were often caught in the middle of Moro-Spanish conflicts since Basilan was a strategic island near Zamboanga. So some coastal areas were influenced by Spanish forts, but the interior Yakan communities remained independent. So the Yakan live a peaceful agricultural life guided by their traditional local leaders or the Panglima and religious teachers or the Imam. So they maintain their own language Yakan and distinct clothing patterns and weaving tradition even as the Spanish expanded nearby. So when the American established schools and governance system in Basilan, some Yakan began to engage in trade and education, while others remained in traditional farming communities. Despite American presence, the Yakan preserved their language, Islam, and weaving arts. So today, many Yakans were affected by migration and land conflicts in Mindanao during the 1960s to 1970. Some became involved to Moro movements seeking self-determination. The Yakan are recognized as one of the 13th Moro ethnolinguistic groups under the Bangsamoro identity, although Basilan is the mix of Yakan, Tausug, and Chabacano culture. So modern Yakan's community continued to preserve their arts, especially weaving, music, and dance as symbols of cultural pride. So Yakan weaving is world famous, known for its bright geometric patterns and deep symbolic meaning. Women use the backstrap loom to make colorful fabrics for traditional clothing, belts, and headscarf. So siputangan headscarf with diamond design. Sawal means traditional trouser. Badjao, blouse worn by women. So their music and dance perform kulintang music. It is a set of small gongs during celebration. So the Yakan dance reflects community, unity, and joy, often performed in weddings and feasts. So most Yakan today are Sunni Muslims. They observe Islamic holidays, practice circumcision rites, and hold wedding rituals that blend Islamic law with Yakan custom. So what we have discussed today is only a glimpse of Mindanao's vast cultural heritage. There are still many groups that were not included in my report and even more that remain undiscovered or less documented. So this reminds us that our understanding of Mindanao is still growing and that every community, no matter how small, deserves to be recognized and respected.